Freethought Forum, a program produced and funded by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Ralph Eisler.
And I'm Faithless Forrest. And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them, and it promotes rational thinking rooted in scholarship and science and free of supernatural beliefs.
And this is a call-in show. However, we have only one phone line, so if you can't get through, we invite you to tweet us at FFTVKNOX. While we go over a few announcements, we invite you to start calling in now at the number on the screen. Get a pen and paper, and we'll give you our email address later in the show.
Well, the Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. We're changing locations, and so next week it's going to be, and we'll cover the location in the mid-program break. When you get there, though, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Delahunty at Atheist Experience says, if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
Okay, well, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have several monthly meetings. The first and third Sunday mornings are usually lectures with lively discussions. The book club meets on the second Sunday, and the reflections group often gets together for a potluck lunch on the fourth Sunday. Later in the show, our websites will be given to you, so you can go there for additional details, including times and locations.
All right, the main topic today is assessing the meaning of religious freedom. But before we take up the main topic, we got something in the news?
Yeah, something I thought was kind of interesting, that in the United States today, we seem to be, the religious groups seem to be gaining more and more power with the political guys we have in office right now. Whereas in Europe, it's kind of going the other way. In particular, I picked up this little news item about Ireland.
You want me to grab this part here? It says, in Europe, as Europe becomes increasingly secularized, a major change has taken place in the educational system in Ireland. Secondary school students no longer have to study religion. Minister for Education Richard Burton, I guess that would be, has released a circular stating that religion will effectively be made optional in Irish secondary schools. He notes that it is a constitutional right for students who choose not to participate in religion class to be offered an alternative, meaningful program.
And this is quite amazing. And just a few decades ago, Ireland was almost a theocracy.
Strongly Catholic.
Strongly Catholic. Catholic Church had people in its grip, and they're slowly losing it. Anyhow, in Ireland, the Community and Education Training Board schools will now offer students different subjects should they opt out of studying religion. Previously, students who chose not to partake in religious education, which required parental consent and approval from the school principal, were forced to sit in the back of the class or in the library with no alternative studies offered. In many cases, students were not allowed to even complete coursework in other subjects, nor were they allowed to wear earphones. Groups such as Atheist Ireland have long campaigned on the issue of religious education in state schools for parents and students who are not religious.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I mean, you can't describe that other than punishment. That's meant to be.
Exactly, it's meant to pick out these students, so the other kids can point to them and say, look, he's not one of us, he's not one of our tribe.
I'm reminded of the term penitentiary. You know, a penitentiary is a place where people were locked up and expected to do penance.
Yeah.
And in the United States, penitentiaries, when they were first established, they didn't allow talking and things like that. People were supposed to sit there quiet and reflect on their sins, I guess.
Yeah.
This is strikingly like that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, this change will come into effect immediately in more than 300 multi-denominational second-level schools. Minister Burton stated it is important that multi-denominational schools fully implement this curricular as it presents an important opportunity to meet the expectation of parents and students in a changing society. The Department of Education maintained the past practice of arranged religious instruction based on an assumption that the majority of students are Catholic, and it is no longer appropriate.
So that tells you something, doesn't it?
I wonder if it was integration in the European Union that kind of sped this issue up.
It might have been partly.
Because I think the European Union has rather strong anti-discrimination
Strong
like
human
things.
rights
Yeah.
necessities, yeah. So anyhow, this change is somewhat astonishing. As said before, the Roman Catholic Church had a complete stranglehold on the country of Ireland just a few decades ago. And it's one more sign that religious affiliation is declining in modernized European countries. In contrast, we see a vocal effort by American theists to inject more religion into schools. A point that brings us to today's main topic, assessing the meaning of religious freedom, or as it says up on the board there, if you want to talk about it, what should religious freedom mean?
As we were reading this, I couldn't help but remember a very entertaining, fascinating podcast from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They interviewed, I believe it was a former Irish priest, and I think he may have taught in their school systems as well. But, you know, like many people who studied the Bible, he eventually, you know, found he couldn't believe it. And it was it was entertaining to hear his life story, as well as get a glimpse of how, you know, let's call it a Christian theocracy country work,
Yeah.
other than the United States, where I'm embedded in a nation where we, you know, they're putting, in the mid-50s, they put God into the pledge and on the money. But yet we've had, you know, a legislated separation of church and state, well, constitutionally mandated, where they never had that. So they're kind of growing into it, whereas we're sort of trying to, you know, make sure that there are no leaks in the dam between church and state. And I changed the wall analogy to a dam.
Yeah, change wall to a dam, yeah, okay.
All right.
We could say dam about a lot of things, I guess.
There we go.
Anyhow, we have a long history in this country of defending something called religious freedom, but there doesn't seem to be any real consensus about what religious freedom actually means. It seems to have precisely the opposite meaning for the atheist and theistic communities. Evangelicals think it means the right to impose their beliefs on everybody else because they're the majority, and if they vote for something, why they think they can impose it on everybody else. But that doesn't respect the rights of the minorities, which is what the democracy is built on.
Well, the atheist view is more in line with those intended by the founders of the nation. The Establishment Clause of the Constitution states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This is somewhat vague, as is a lot of the Constitution, because the framers did not want to strictly tie the hands of future generations. But consider Thomas Jefferson's statement. The legitimate powers of government extend to such acts only as are injurious to others. But it doesn't mean no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no gods. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg.
Yeah, but we know also that theists don't seem to like this. I mean, what are they strongly against gay marriage, any kind of LGBT equal rights? Those things neither pick their pocket nor break their leg, but they're totally against it, right?
Yes, it's kind of like they think that freedom from religion means that religion gets to pick the pocket of the government.
Yeah.
To use government assets to promote their particular religion, and so on. Now, when I read the Constitution, as well as things that Jefferson, Madison, and Franklin have read about the relationship of government and religious organizations, I can't help but say that it seems to me that the intent of the Establishment Clause was the result of religious intolerance and religious fighting one sect against the other, and that what they had to do as let's say parents is say, if you children can't stop fighting over this toy, and the toy is who gets to control the government, we have to take the toy away from all of you. And that's what this does. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And by establishment, they meant the government will not pick a religion.
Yeah, well, these people were thoroughly steeped in the English Enlightenment movement, which wanted to, change this non-separation between church and state. The Church of England was the established church, right? And the reason the so-called Pilgrims or Puritans came was because they did not like the rituals of the English church, because they thought they were too close to Catholicism with a lot of pomp and circumstance and rituals. And so that was the mindset, I think, of the people of that time. They didn't want to have an established church impose its views on the way people could worship. Okay. Now, having said that, on the other hand, we have to remember that the Puritans didn't come here seeking religious freedom so much as they were kicked out of England because they wanted to control the Anglican Church.
Yes, the Pilgrims, I think the Pilgrims, in a sense, are people who stem from a previous period when Oliver Cromwell had actually managed to get political power and then try to rework the religious structure of England along this Puritan form. And by Puritan, they mean driving out the Catholic policies and so once they lost political power, then in order to get freedom, they got on boats and came to America, where they then proceeded to try and purify one another's religion.
Yeah, I think we have a caller here.
All right. Well, go ahead, Rev. Caller, you're on Freethought Forum TV. Can we get a name or a nickname?
It's Charles from Central Illinois.
Hello, Charles.
Yes, you're calling about today's show and freedom of religion. What does it mean? When I look back at early U.S. history, I noticed that the Treaty of Tripoli stated that the Muslim world had no reason to fear from America because America was not founded as a Christian nation. So
that's right. The treaty was proved unanimously by Congress and signed by John Adams. It said
not to mention that it was published in every newspaper in the then Republic.
Oh yeah, sure.
All righty, so Ralph was somewhat talking about it. Charles, when did the Treaty of Tripoli, when was that created?
That was by James Madison's presidency, and I'm not certain of the date, but it was the late 1790s.
I'll help you with that.
1800s.
The negotiation happened during Washington's presidency, but it finally got finished early in Adams' presidency. So Adams was the second president. But the actual negotiations are George Washington's. And I think John Jay was the ambassador who did that. John Jay is one of the other important founders. He wrote a lot of the Federalist Papers, and more people should recognize John Jay's name as well.
Yes, I find the ignorance of that founding father's sequence, the entire embroilment between
Yeah, it takes a
Very
while for these
dated.
things to get written up and formulated. By the time everybody gets his say-so, it can be a few years.
Yes, but the thing that I find infuriating is that this is the kind of thing they're not teaching in schools these days.
Right.
And we're getting to the point of where we have that church in Alabama with its own police force.
Oh, yeah.
And now there's a judge in Texas that has God tell him who is and isn't guilty. And, you know.
Say that again, Charles. I didn't get that. That something about a judge in Texas.
A judge in Texas has made rulings declaring that God has spoken to him on whether or not a defendant was or wasn't guilty.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
He was immediately overruled by the state judiciary watch system, and a new trial has been set. But this is getting, you know.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point, which is one of the things we wanted to address here, and that was, see more and more that these really hardcore evangelical Christians think they're above the law.
Or rather, that the law means what they want it to mean when they want it to mean.
Well, they'll do it both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you take Roy Moore, this fellow who was candidate for the Senate seat there in Alabama. He was Chief Justice. He was elected Chief Justice twice and deposed twice. He moved this huge granite monument with the Ten Commandments inscribed on them onto the Capitol grounds and refused to take it off, saying basically that God's law supersedes our civil law.
Yeah. And then that was that whole Senate one where along the way he mentioned somewhere along the line that, yes, we should be like we were back in the good old days. You know, we may have had slavery, but we also had people following a Christian life and caring for each other.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not sure that they cared for each other any more than they do today. But, you know, there's always a longing for the good old days. Make America great again, whatever that means.
Yeah. So, Charles, I'd like to share with you another piece of the Constitution I think doesn't get spoken about enough, and that is that I think when they wrote it, they were actually anticipating people claiming that God's law might be superior, and they preempted that argument by saying that this Constitution and the treaties that are, the exact phrasing escapes me now, but the treaties that are adopted are the supreme law of the land. So that's very categorical. You know, the Constitution and the treaties that are approved are the supreme law of the land. And so that's why it's kind of important that the Treaty of Tripoli is actually supreme law of the land. And it says this is not a Christian nation.
Not to mention the fact that they were trying to avoid things like the 30 Years' War and people getting, you know, run out of their homes and towns, of religious beliefs and so forth. This is one of the principal reasons why a significant portion of New England's population will be pilgrims and, oh hell, here comes that train.
That's okay, keep talking.
Left England is because they weren't allowed to dominate and control society the way they thought God said they should. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something we don't mention in schools either.
Right.
Actually, I kind of learned it that way. I'd learned that Puritanism left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths by the time they got to the United States, in the English colonies, that Puritanism took on a negative connotation. That to say that that's Puritanistic is that some other colonists would have recognized that as a pejorative description. I don't.
In Virginia, the first settlement in Virginia was Jamestown, and they had an established church. That was the Anglican Church, okay? And then when the state of Virginia was actually formed, that was the established religion there. And they were not very kind to Quakers. Nobody was kind to Quakers. And they didn't like Puritans much either. So.
No, they didn't like Catholics. They didn't like Quakers. They
Right.
didn't like
Right. It's
the more extreme Protestant sects, such as the Puritans and so forth. And so when you closely examine the early history of what would become the United States back when we were still part of the British Empire, you will find that in Maryland there was a large-scale purge of Quakers. And one of the reasons why Pennsylvania became Pennsylvania is that William Penn basically decided to establish a colony of his own where such things would not be tolerated.
right.
When you say such things, meaning the discriminatory practices, Penn was more accommodating, right?
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
He was a Quaker, and so he managed to get Pennsylvania as a land grant to establish a colony for Quakers. And you have to remember, these early states were divided up along religious lines in many cases. Maryland was mostly Catholic, and you had these Congregationalists, the Puritans in New England, etc. Roger, what's his name?
Williams.
Established Rhode Island as for the Baptists, so they were all segregated.
Ralph, you grew up in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah.
So you know, how should we say, you know some things that maybe I was taught, but I'd forgotten that. My memory about how the states were divided is that some of them were, let's call it amusingly enough, the boundaries were set by the whim of a king who was giving his some territory to a friend, and I think, like York comes to mind. Although New York had been New Amsterdam, but that maybe is the city, not the territory around it.
Yeah.
That was the city of New Amsterdam, founded by the Dutch.
Yeah,
Right.
but the area around it that is the state of New York, would that have been something that
I'm
the
not
king
sure.
gave to his friend on a whim?
I'm not sure about New York. I don't know. And of course, natural boundaries, rivers, mountains, often determine, the extent of those.
Well, that would be like the exact line, but they would say, well, we'll give my buddy York the area between these boundaries, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think Pennsylvania was set up that way. I think Maryland was. New York, I'm not exactly sure, and all that. But in any case, right. And the other thing, before the Constitution was actually ratified, most states did have tests, religious tests for public office.
That was part of the problems that they were having with the Articles of Confederation with the United States.
Right. And
That was before the establishment of the Republic, before George Washington was elected first president, and the Continental Congress of 1791, I think it was, which is when we hammered out the Constitution of the Republic.
Yeah. Well,
And
what I was trying to say was that, gradually most of the states got rid of those. And that was one of Thomas Jefferson's proudest things, that he and
James Madison.
James Madison were able to eliminate those tests for religious affiliations
In Virginia.
in Virginia.
Yeah.
yes. And why we have in the Constitution, no religious test shall be required for public office.
Right.
So in a way, actually, that was another sort of secondary kind of revolution that happened there. There's a marvelous website, the Yale University Law School Avalon Project. They have text transcriptions of a lot of historic documents, including the constitutions of many of the states when they were before the adoption of our national constitution. So they would be the constitution of the states while we are operating under the Articles of Confederation. And of the 13 states, I think it was like all but maybe 3 had explicit religious tests. And some of those tests were designed obviously to preclude Catholics from holding office, that they were only going to allow Protestant faith holders. Others were more generous and would have allowed Catholics and even Jewish people. But they were definitely trying to exclude non-believers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Charles, we should thank you and ask you to clear the line, and maybe we'll get a few more callers here about what religious freedom should mean. All righty. Bye then.
Okay. So what we've seen in the recent years is this spate of so-called religious freedom reformation acts being passed in various states. Now, the original act at that time was passed by the Congress because a certain Indian group, as I understand it, used peyote in their
As
religious
part of their
practices,
ceremonies.
in their ceremonies, and hallucinogenics were forbidden.
Or at least the peyote was against narcotic laws, and the drug enforcement people arrested them, and they said, hey, come on, let us use this stuff.
Right. So I think it was actually Ted Kennedy who pushed that through to get an exemption. And if you talk about doing something, an action of unintended consequences, this was probably one of the worst, because it opened the floodgates for people to come in and claim that all sorts of practices were based on strongly held religious beliefs. So I can remember that our Vice President Mike Pence grinning from ear to ear as he signed one for Indiana, and he's surrounded by all these priests and rabbis and nuns and
Yep.
et cetera, who really like that. And so that's more to the point of what we really want to get to on the show is if somebody claims he has a deeply held religious belief that supersedes our civil laws, should we recognize that?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to make that argument. There was some kind of a News Sentinel article here that you wanted to talk about?
Oh yeah, I mean part of this, this came up, remember there was this baker that there was a gay couple who wanted him to make a cake.
Uh-huh.
And he declared that what he did was artistic, rather than being in the commercial line or something of the sort. And he invoked his deeply held religious views because he didn't like the idea of gay marriage.
Mm-hmm.
He was totally against.
So he refused to give them the service that he normally gave to the rest of the public.
Right. Now, I think that since then this case has gone to court and they have found in favor of the two gay guys.
Yes, I think it went all the way to the Supreme Court. There was a large fine levied against the business owner, and I think it's gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and the fine has been upheld.
Right. So, but anyhow, there was a letter in the News Sentinel by, let's see, what's the guy's Presbyterian minister? His name's Dr. Warner Davis. And he endorsed the baker, Phillips, who refused to provide the wedding cake for the two gay men, owing to his religious convictions. Davis effectively stated that an individual's religious beliefs should always trump the law. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people in this country who are starting to promote this view right now. But this perspective is an argument for anarchy. There's no single set of religious convictions in a pluralistic society. And while religious business owners are free to believe whatever they wish, to worship whatever God they wish, and to hate whomever they wish, they should not receive any special dispensation for deny services or civil rights to Americans who are not in conformity with their religious views. We fought this battle in the segregation case
Yep.
in the 1960s. It's exactly the same type of thing, except it's a different group. It seems like these really strong religious groups have to have a devil of some sort. If it's not blacks, it's going to be gays. If it's not gays, it's going to be atheists like us, okay? And if they can't find anybody, a real live person, they'll make up some invisible god called Satan to do the same thing. And this is just ridiculous, and the civil authorities in this country should not permit this type of religious freedom.
You know, we live in a nation, you know, our Constitution says, we the people of the United States of America, well, I can't do it verbatim, but it's, you know, to promote the general welfare, provide common defense. You know, people, you know, serve in the military, putting their lives at risk to protect all of us, including some of those people who are, you know, gays, lesbians, and other minorities. And it's outrageous to me to think that someone who is sitting here in the comfort of the land that has been defended at the risk of lost blood and broken bones and lost life can say, I get to pick and choose whether or not I will serve people.
Yeah.
Because they don't know that the people that they've just chosen to discriminate against didn't, you know, risk life and limb to defend our nation.
Right, exactly. And we find this case now where President Trump has come out and he you know, want to make an executive order banning transgenders in the military, okay? For no good reason except his base likes it. They'll respond to it.
Yeah.
And the military people, they don't want any part of that. They've got all kinds of people serving there. They mostly straight, but there's certainly a large number of gay people, and I don't know, certainly a countable number of transgendered people doing their job, just what you say, defending the country.
Yeah, yeah.
And to pander to these religious zealots on the basis of this, I find absolutely execrable.
All righty.
So anyhow, I'm very much against these so-called religious freedom restoration acts. I think they're a nightmare so far as a country of laws go. They just will totally do away with any kind of rational law or behavior.
You know, it makes you want to ask, what do they think they can get away with? You know, in defense of Judge Moore, who was accused of very inappropriate behavior with very young girls, we heard, you know, I think he was some kind of a Baptist minister saying, you know, how, well, Mary of the Bible, the mother of Jesus, you know, was a young girl, so, well, that makes it all right. So that means that they're going to argue that laws saying, you know, there's the term, the age of consent, don't apply to Christians who simply don't want it to apply to them. That's literally what that guy was suggesting.
Yep, you are right. Well, it's getting down to time where maybe we ought to think about taking program break.
The mid-program break, all right.
Identify our sponsors here and give you a little more information.
In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. We want to thank DW for substantially funding this show. Okay, well, we've moved from our long-time previous spot at 5 p.m. Tuesdays. This is our new regular time, every Wednesday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. on Knoxville Community Access Television Channel 6, 12, 99, or 193, depending upon your local cable network. Pardon me.
Tell your out-of-town friends to see us streamlining at ctvknox.org.
This is a live call-in show, and today is February 28, 2018. And viewers can talk to us now by dialing the number on the screen. Why don't you call that number while we take a short break and watch these little videos about our sponsor.
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
And we're back. The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets weekly. We have an evening meetup for fun, food, drink, and conversation. You can find us online at knoxvilleatheist.org. The purpose of ASK is to supply a venue for community camaraderie and outreach to atheist, agnostic, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons in the East Tennessee area. Next Tuesday's meeting is at a new location. It's Black Horse Pub and Brewery, which is 4429 Kingston Pike, and I guess it's in the Western Shopping Plaza. I've never been there.
Okay. On the first and third Sundays each month, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have meetings involving lively presentations and discussions at 10:30 a.m. on the main campus of Pellissippi State Community College. First Sunday discussion topic this month is gun violence. Guess who will lead the discussion on the current state of gun violence in our country.
All right, and so this is going to be a roundtable discussion as well. That means he'll present, we'll have back and forth with members and him. All right, the second Sunday get-together is a book club at 2 p.m. at Books A Million on Kingston Pike, and the book for March, on March the 11th, is I Contain Multitudes, The Microbes Within Us and a Grander View of Life by Ed Young. You need not have read the book to attend, but of course it helps. See our website, rationalists.org, for further information. Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where you'll find that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. All right, so back to the program. We're discussing religious freedom here.
Yeah, and it seems to me that juxtaposing the terms religion and freedom is almost an oxymoron. All religions have originated as methods of crowd control. They're designed to prey on people's fear of the unknown, particularly their mortality and inevitable death. This is done by small priesthoods who want political power and wealth that they can accumulate without making any real contributions to society. Freedom is not a characteristic of religions. For example, apostasy in Islam, that is leaving the religion, is punishable by death. Egypt right now is debating whether atheism should be outlawed. And the Taliban has been known to shoot at young girls who just want to get an education. These are all instances of primitive tribalism surviving into the modern world, when the mythologies that spawned them should have long ago been thrown on the trash bin of history.
Now, of course, American Christians are going to say, well, that's Islam.
Yeah.
You know, we Christians don't condone any such behavior. But on almost a daily basis, you can find reprehensible acts like this that plague society. Almost all religions are coercive and deeply held religious views have been used for millennia to excuse or deny rights to certain groups. Southern Christians invoked religious texts to justify slavery and Jim Crow laws. Martin Luther based his propositions on Scripture, and after despairing of being able to convert Jews to Christianity, he found justification to advocate burning their synagogues, destroying their houses and confiscating their wealth, and abolishing safe conduct for them on the highways.
Right.
So he's the founder of Protestantism.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called
Yeah.
The
it's a long
Jews,
treatise,
the Jews and
their lies.
and their lies. Yeah.
Yeah. 15,000 word treatise.
So, as you were talking, I made the following note. You talked about methods of crowd control, and this crowd control is that you're creating in groups and out groups. Us versus them, and that's so very apparent, especially in the Old Testament, where from time to time Yahweh commands the Hebrews to put away their foreign wives and stuff like that, and that the Hebrews are the chosen people. They're different and separated. And I must remind viewers that the Hebrew Bible is the root of Christianity as well as it is the root of Islam.
Yes, the argument that there's an old covenant and a new covenant, that just doesn't hold much water so far as I'm concerned.
If Judge Moore, he was posting the Ten Commandments. Where's that come from? The Old Testament. He's an Old Testament God worshiping guy, and
Right.
to talk to him to say, oh well, he's somehow better because he's a Christian, it's missing an important point.
Yeah, 7 of the 10 so-called 10 commandments have nothing to do with the society that we live in. They have to do with worshiping that Jewish God in one way or another.
Keeping the Sabbath on a specific day. Oh, it's so funny that he would post a big stone tablet about. We got another call?
Okay.
Do we have a call? Hey, caller, give us a name or a nickname.
Caller would be fine.
All right, caller, what is your comment or question?
You were talking about religious oppression, and just recently, you're talking about how it happens by politicians and people that want to oppress other people by using religion, and I just couldn't help but think of the news where just recently Vice President Pence said that there will be no more abortions in our lifetime. And I didn't know where he was getting that from, if he was getting it from a religious standpoint or his own prognostication, predictions. And also Scott Pruitt, our Secretary of the Interior, I believe he is. Is that who he is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and him saying that Jesus wants us to suck out all the oil and gas and use it up. These resources are there for us, and which kind of reminded me of a previous Secretary of the Interior who said something to the effect that there was no need to try to preserve the earth since the rapture was going to be soon. That was Reagan's.
Yeah.
That was James Watt was his name.
Right.
Yeah. So amongst all of that nonsense, I sort of thought that what you were saying kind of rings true, but that's not necessarily to oppress anybody as much as to make money for the corporations. So, it sort of sounded the same a little bit.
Well, I think there are two things that drive people. One is wealth, and the other is power. Henry Kissinger once made the statement that power is a great aphrodisiac, meaning that if you've got power, you can attract a lot of women.
Well, that's why I used to drive a 57 Chevy.
Yeah.
All right.
But back, caller, getting back to the Mike Pence statement. I read that, and I don't know whether he's naive or just stupid, because if the Supreme Court were to overturn Roe v. Wade tomorrow, there would still be abortions.
Well, he said it would be the end of legal abortions, which said to me it would be the beginning of illegal ones.
Yes, well, or the
return to.
The return to illegal ones. I mean, what Roe v. Wade did was it recognized the reality of the fact that people are going to have abortions for various reasons. I'm not condoning one or another, but they're going to have them. It's just facing reality, and you're much better off if you can, number one, present a lot of sex education in the schools to young men and women so that they understand things, they understand reproduction consequences. And number two, to make abortion safe when one has to be had.
I see. Well, one of the things that kind of bothers me about politics and religion, or at least Christianity, is that there was one place in the Bible that says we deserve the leaders that God puts in place. And I want to say right now that whatever the hell I did to get Trump as president, I am so sorry for.
All right, you're going to have to do some penance, say some Hail Marys and things like that, I guess.
Maybe if we'd all go to confession on Fridays, he'd disappear.
So caller.
That would be a good idea. We could try that.
All right.
All right, I'll get off here.
No, caller, before you go, the question we posed on the screen there is, what should religious freedom mean?
Oh, I
Tell us,
don't know
should
what
it mean?
Charles said, but I think you said something about the Puritans, about how someone once said that they came to America looking for religious freedom, and that's hogwash. The Puritans came over here because they weren't able to religiously abuse people, and they came over here so they could start their own religious commune and start using religion to oppress people. They left England, or they left Europe, because they had too much religious freedom, and their children were getting wild ideas. So they came over here, and as soon as they got here, they started.
Well, I think maybe there's a little confusion. There were two groups of Puritans. There was one group that were called the Separatists, and they really wanted religious freedom, and they moved to Holland. And
Right.
Holland was very lax society, and they were worried that their children were going to adopt, the mores of the Dutch society, and they were kind of horrified by it. And so they came to America. That's the group we call the Pilgrims, who came earlier.
Right, well, that's the group I'm talking about. As soon as they came over here, they started passing religious laws on everybody.
Yeah, sure. Bigger group, the Puritans, were the ones that we had talked about before, of being basically kicked out of England.
What I understood is they left England and went to the Netherlands, and I think it was the Netherlands,
Yeah,
and then came over here from there.
That was first. That was a small group called the Separatists. They were Puritans,
Okay.
but they were a small group called the Separatists. And you're right, they went to Holland and then they came over here. But the biggest group of the Puritans came later. They were the ones that came and formed the Massachusetts colony rather than the Plymouth colony.
Okay. Well, thanks for straightening that out for me.
Okay.
But caller, what should religious freedom mean?
Religious freedom.
Think that's a
what
good
should
thing.
It mean?
What should it mean?
Worship any ridiculous god you want to, but leave everybody else alone. I mean, if religious freedom means I'm going to make somebody else worship my God, that's not religious freedom. That's always religious oppression, and that's the way it's always been.
Right, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Franklin Roosevelt gave a so-called Four Freedom speech. I think it was State of the Union speech in 1941, and he said every person should have the four freedoms. They should have freedom of speech, freedom from want, freedom from fear, and freedom to worship. He did not say freedom of religion. He said freedom to worship, which is exactly what you said.
Well, how can corporations have religion now?
Don't ask me. How can corporations be considered people?
Yeah, That's a Supreme Court decision that needs revisiting.
I
and
mean, when I go to the hospital, I don't want somebody treating me within their religious boundaries. I don't want to be on the operating table and somebody have some kind of religious epiphany.
Yeah, right during the middle of your operation would be bad timing.
Yeah.
Well, caller, quick like, can for the benefit of the viewers, have you watched this show before?
Oh, I don't think that would benefit any viewer, but yes, I have. Yes, I have. And by the way, I know that you are an astronomer type person.
Yeah, it's been known to happen.
Yeah, well, this humanity star thing, I can't figure out when I'm going to be able to see it. So if you could give us some updates on your show of when we could see this humanity star thing, I'd appreciate it.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Oh, it's a globe about this big with reflective surfaces on it, and it's, you know, when there's hype about it that it's going to be so bright that it'll be annoying, but it's actually it's only this big, and so even if you had a fully reflective surface that big, it's not all that bright. You're much better off wanting to go and find the International Space Station. It is bright and interesting. The Humanity Star is, I will call it empty enthusiasm. There we go.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Well, I kept thinking I thought there was something wrong with my eyes or something. I couldn't see it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll try and remember to post something on the Freethought Forum Facebook page about it. And if I don't, if you post a question there, I will certainly notice the question and be reminded.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Thanks, caller.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, well,
Lines are open. We still got about 7 minutes, so give us a call. Do so quickly.
right, okay. Anyhow, we were talking about how authoritarian religions are, right? And we can see this authoritarian tendency being advocated more and more as the religious right is starting to feel some pressure from backlash to their hate-mongering pulls. I want to look at some statements made by former House Speaker Newt Gingrich at the Ave Maria School of Law. He says, the rise of a secular atheist philosophy in the West is an equally or even more dangerous threat to Christianity than those terrorist organizations that will kill Christians if they don't submit. Now, that's going pretty far out there, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, when you think about what people like Richard Dawkins says, is that, you know, he says things like, you know, we should, he'll use the word ridicule, and by that mean say, you know, the Old Testament has magic snakes in it. Come on. Now, that's how we attack religion. We examine it and ask, you know, is it reasonable to think that magic snakes are anything other than man-made myth? So Gingrich says that we're as good as murderers by asking questions like, is magic snakes real?
Well, I don't think he quite thinks we're like murderers, but he thinks we are as threatening to his religion as the murderers are. I mean, there are different ways to kill things off. One is by ideas, and one is by the sword.
Well, you know, in reality, it says, so this quote said, equally or even more dangerous to Christians than those terrorist organizations. Well, you know,
right.
The terrorist organizations actually built religious fervor. That was Osama bin Laden's intent, is he created a much stronger religious conflict than we had before. Of Islam versus Christianity. And you have people in our government and our military saying we're on a crusade. And crusade is a historical event that was a religious war.
Yeah. Do you remember a few months back there was a kind of a hullabaloo about this poster that was up in one of the police buildings here. It said, if God is with us, who can be against us?
Yeah.
And that's exactly the sentiment I think that ISIS would buy into fully.
Indeed. Well, you know, my goodness, those people flew. It wasn't ISIS, that was Al Qaeda. You know, flew airplanes into buildings.
Sure,
they thought
exactly.
someone was with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, God was their co-pilot. My goodness.
Okay, going on with what Gingrich said, he said religious institutions such as the Ave Maria School of Law in North Naples, where he was talking, can serve as centers of resistance. See the siege mentality there. To those two horrendous wars underway against Christianity, meaning the atheists and the terrorists. He says the secular philosophy dominates universities. It's embraced by newspaper editors and Hollywood. It represents a repudiation of everything we've learned about the importance of the spiritual world.
If Newt was here, I'd say, Newt, you haven't even proved the spiritual world exists, much less that you know what it says.
This is incredible. I can't believe this guy says this.
So North Naples, this is Naples, Florida?
Yeah, apparently Naples, Florida, I guess, where it was.
Naples is such a pretty place to,
Yeah, and so anyhow, the importance of the spiritual world, I'm reminded of a statement that Jesse Ventura gave in a Playboy interview when he was governor. He said, religion is a crutch for people with weak minds. And of course, he got a lot of
blowback from that. He chose not to run after that. It's hard to say. I'm from Minnesota, and although I didn't live there at the time, a friend of mine said something very remarkable about Gingrich. I think it was the Vikings went to the governor and the state legislature and said, "Build us a new stadium." And Gingrich and Ventura said, last time I checked, we don't rebuild schools after 15 years. And, when we own the schools, why should we rebuild a stadium for you? Because the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome was only 15 years old. He sent them packing. And, my friends who lived there, they really liked that the private interests weren't going to reach into their pocket at taxpayer expense.
Yeah, this happened, had been going on for years in San Diego, this type of conflict going on. And finally the Chargers moved out, went north.
Well, we've got only about a minute or so left to comment. Are there any important points you want to cover before we run out of time?
No, I just say that the type of talk Gingrich is putting up is this holy war going on, and one side or the other is going to win and dominate. I think is bad for the country. It's ridiculous. Same type of divisiveness he displayed when he was Speaker of the House. So we only have about a minute to go here, and maybe we should
need to start working
talking a little bit.
It's time to start wrapping things up. Get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
You can see this show most Wednesdays from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. You can give us feedback by email at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com or on our Facebook page, Freethought Forum Knoxville.
All righty. We'd like to thank Sam and Rev for technical support, the staff at CTV Knox, and our viewers and our callers.
And I just want to remind you that the nuns, those who identify with no religion, now comprise 34% of the population. They exceed Protestants, who are at 33%, and Roman Catholics at 21%. So the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee are places where this fast-growing group can find fellowship and fun. So come look at our websites, come to the Ask Meetup.